Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. Currently, we're making a basic tutorial for Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admiral's Edition. Now, this is episode number 11, so we have come a long way, and I believe this might be the final episode of the basic tutorial. We are going to go ahead and do a let's play. So we're going to set up all of our forces, go through each region or country or area for the allies and set everything up. And then we're going to play the game. But I think this might be the last basic tutorial piece because I think we've hit most of the high points and I've saved ground units for last. Now you may say, well, that's kind of strange, right? Because we're playing a war game. Usually, if you were going to be doing a tutorial for a war game, ground units are pretty important, right? But this game, since it has such robust and detailed naval components and air components, I thought I would cover those first when we did these tutorials because if you're watching these videos and you're interested in the game, you very likely played many war games in the past, and so the ground unit stuff is more familiar to you. Most war games center completely around the ground units, and maybe the naval and the air is a little more abstracted, but it's kind of all about the ground units. Now, this game has three games in one. It's got the huge air war, it's got the huge naval war, but it also has a really good ground war. If the ground war was the whole game, it would still be an excellent, 9.9 out of 10 game, because the ground war is done very, very well. And that shouldn't surprise you, right? It's Gary Grigsby. It's very similar to War in the East or War in the West when it comes to the ground war. It also has some differences. So if you've played those games, um, you may still want to watch this because it does have its own intricacies, just like War in the West and War in the East are a little different. This is definitely even more different than those two games are from each other. I actually think it's got some improvements over the systems in those games, although it may not be quite as in depth, although it is very in depth. So let's jump into it and talk about ground units in War in the Pacific. Now, I'm down here in Sydney, as usual, because Sydney has a good representation of the different kinds of ground units that you'll find in the game. There are seven different types, and we'll get into them in a second. But first of all, let's just kind of take a big sweep of southeastern Australia here. Now, we've talked about in the map episode these graphical representations. So here in Brisbane, we've got ships at anchor, we've got an airfield with some air units, and down here in the bottom left, we see we have at least one ground unit. As we've discussed before, maybe more than one, but that NATO symbol in the bottom left tells us that we at least have one ground unit. And if you look across the map, ground units are more uh, represented than the other types. You kind of see that there's sort of a ground unit at pretty much every base, which makes sense in some respects, right? Why even have a base if you don't have any ground units? So you may have some far-flung airfield somewhere, but you're still going to need people there. Um, and so most of these bases, Toowoomba does not, but most of these bases are going to have some sort of ground units. Um, and if you roll over them, if you roll over the NATO symbol, there we go, you will see a kind of breakdown of the different kinds of ground units that are at this base. Now, we're not going to go into every number here. I can tell you, it tells you the kind of what kind of unit it is. It tells you the assault strength. It, it goes into various numbers there that you can kind of research more on your own or figure out on your own once we go through the rest of the section. But this will tell you kind of a simple breakdown of what you've got at this base. Now, another thing I wanted to point out, and I actually don't think we've talked about this, which is interesting. but we really just haven't talked about ground units. Is see how light this NATO green is here? How light? It's just a normal kind of green, right? When we get down to Sydney, see how dark the box is? That is representing to you that there is a lot more assault strength at Sydney than there is at Brisbane. So the darker the box, again, Canberra is darker than Port Kembla. You know, and that's just telling you there might be more units or there might be less, but whatever's there has got a lot more assault strength than is at Newcastle, let's say. So the darker that box, the more assault strength you have. So it's a very quick and easy way to see where you have the bulk of your troops, or at least the bulk of the powerful parts of your troops. So that's kind of that graphical representation. Now down here to the heads up display for Sydney, or at least that's what I call it, the heads up display, you'll see the flag over here to the left. So we've got ships at anchor, we've got airfields, we've got task forces, and we've got ground units. Now, this is a great screen. It tells you so much information. It'll tell you what type of unit you're dealing with, their name, their command, who they're attached to, their load cost. If you want to put them on transports, like we talked about in the naval section, it will tell you their assault value, um, how many supplies they have, reinforcements, upgrades, whether you've selected to give that unit reinforcements and upgrades, the operations mode that they're in, and you can change all of the stuff that's in yellow. So you can give all of your orders here if you want to. This pack goes into, if we move this to strategic mode, oh, can we? Oh, maybe that one's locked. That's probably, yep, there's strategic mode. This will tell you how many days it's going to take for this unit to pack to get into full strategic mode. It will tell you the orders you've given it and its combat objectives. So, I mean, this screen is fantastic down here to summarize and to give orders if you want, if you have a lot of units. Now, you can also do that, as always, here on the individual unit cards. So you see we're here at the 1st Australian Brigade. It's an infantry unit. We can give it its orders right over here. Just like every other unit in this game, the orders section is here, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about, while we're here in Sydney, the 7 different kinds of ground unit classifications that you will run into in this game. So there are slight derivations of each classification, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but really there are only 7 different unit types. There are headquarters, and you see them here. We've got a command headquarters, and we'll talk about what that means. We've got army headquarters, we've got corps headquarters, we've got air headquarters. So we've got different kinds of headquarters that, taking a step back for a minute, like every other war game in the world, give you certain combat modifiers and bonuses. So all things being equal in the world, you want your units that are attached to headquarters to be close to those headquarters to get all of the bonuses and to get all of the positive modifiers that they provide. And we'll get more into headquarters here in a minute. Now, you also see the second type of ground unit, and that is infantry unit. So the NATO symbol for infantry is going to denote that you have an infantry unit, and that is your basic ground troops, right? These are the guys, these are the boots on the ground that are going to go take bases for you. You can't do that with ships. You can't do it with planes. You can only do it with men on the ground. So this is your basic infantry units. Now they come in different sizes. So this game models all the way down to the battalion level. And even that is not exactly correct. So we have the 39th Australian Battalion up here. If you look down here, now Australia's military is composed of what they call sections. In American parlance, that would be like a squad. So it's a in in Australian terms, it's a group of 10 men is a section. You will see here this models all the way down to the section level. You'll see CMF, infantry section, Vickers section. So this shows you have 36 sections of these guys that make up a battalion. So it gets down to that, granular of a level, if that's what you're interested in, what these are all made up of. Um, so the smallest group in this game, as I said, that will be represented by a unit card is a battalion. So we're on a battalion. Now, 3 to 5 battalions will make a regiment or a brigade. And I can tell you in this game, kind of use regiment or brigade uh, similarly. They're of similar size. Both of them are made up of 3 to 5 battalions. In the real world, the difference is uh, a regiment is kind of your vanilla, generic grouping of 3 to 5 battalions. Um, it's just what you're going to normally have in the Army if they've gone through basic training and came out on the other side. They don't have any specialization, let's say. That would be a regiment, okay? Um, a brigade is usually, in most nations around the world in their armed forces, a brigade is a more specialized force. So that's when you've taken uh, battalions, let's say, and trained them to do a specific task and brought them together. That would be a brigade. But in this game, you can almost in some ways kind of forget the distinction. If you see regiment or you see brigade, they're going to kind of be about the same size and they're going to be made up of battalions. Now, regiments and brigades can be broken down and built up in this game. We'll get into that in a little bit. Um, Regiments and brigades then make up divisions, and divisions are kind of the largest unit card that you will have. So if we have, let's say, 2 to 3, maybe 4 regiments that come together and make a division, that's going to be the largest, ground unit card that you have in the game. So you have infantry units, okay? We've got headquarters, infantry units. What's the third one here? The third one is engineers. So engineers, we've sort of talked about when it came to ports, airfields, fortifications, right? They help you build those things faster. They have vehicles. They build up things. You're going to build your fortifications in a more timely manner if you have engineers at your base. Engineers come in several different flavors. They're probably more differentiated than almost any of the other units because they can kind of be specialized to do different things. Now, you don't do that. You don't really get in here and say, well, I want this to, do, ports better or something like that. It's just the units you're given. They will have some specialization sometimes. So, for instance, this unit is just a general plain vanilla engineer unit. And it will tell you here if it does something a little special. And you could go down here and see what it's made up of. You see it's got 6 engineers. It's got 2 engineer vehicles. It's got a sound detector. That sounds fun. I don't really, what is that? Sonar? Um, Observer Corps, support, it's got all of these things. Now let's go look at an engineer unit that's a little different. And over here in San Francisco, we have a couple of those actually. First of all, we've got a combat engineer regiment, okay? And then we've also got a construction regiment. Now, what's going on there? Combat engineers can help you if you're assaulting an enemy base and that enemy base has fortifications. Combat engineers can actually reduce the level of those fortifications. So when you see combat engineers, it's kind of common sense, right? These combat engineers are not guys that are way back in Provo, Utah, building a base, right? They are out on the front lines with troops, either helping you entrench, because you can do that, or helping you, blow up entrenchments, whatnot. They're combat engineers. So always kind of take note when you look at engineers, what is their sort of best task. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have these guys, working on an airport or an airfield or a port, but that's just not what they're best at. And that's because of what they're made up of. We're not going to get drilled down all the way into that level. If you want to, feel free to do it. Could be interesting. But if I'm just going to tell you on the abstracted level, if it says combat engineer, you would want them more near the front. Um, Same goes for construction regiment in reverse. These guys are more likely to be, you're going to want them someplace where, guess it, they're constructing something. So these engineer units will sort of tell you what their best um, uses. And I always, I never get into the table of elements over here called the table of elements. I really never drill down this far. I don't say, oh, well, it's got an AAMG. I don't even know what the heck this is. Um, I look more at what the game tells me it's optimized to do. So those are engineer units. They're very, very useful, of course. You're going to need engineer units on almost every island where you want to build up the airfield or the port. It speeds all of that up. You're going to want those combat engineers out with your infantry, or at least at very important defensive bases. I guess as the allies, since we're defending early on, you really want them at those bases where we want to build the fortifications quickly, or if we get attacked, we can, kind of take it to the opposite side as far as their entrenchment goes, or we're building up our fortifications better. So anyway, those are engineers. Now, the fourth thing, or the fourth unit that we're going to look at, and we'll go back to Sydney really fast and see if there is one over here. I just don't remember. I'm sure there is. There is in most big cities. You know what? Every time I've said that in these episodes, it's not been the case. How funny. Um, let's go back to San Francisco. You can see a good example of anti-aircraft. Anti-aircraft is always going to look like this symbol. Kind of looks like a mountain peak. I always think it looks like it's shooting up in the air at airplanes, and that's what anti-aircraft does, right? It's kind of that simple. Um, with anti-aircraft, I will say this might be the one time I would look at the toe over here because um, it doesn't have an assault strength. So it does not provide anything for you if you are assaulting an enemy or defending an enemy on the ground. If they're attacking your base, your anti-aircraft is not adding anything to your attack or defend values. What it is adding is shooting down airplanes with its guns. So you can come over here and kind of see what kind of guns it has and how many there are. And that'll give you an idea of how powerful the unit is. I can tell you kind of shorthand between us. If you want to know how big or good an AA unit is, you can also look at the support and the support required. Obviously, if it has more guns, if you don't want to get into the TOE, if it has more guns and has more men manning the guns, it's going to need more support. And that's just kind of a general rule of thumb, right, in this game. So that's AA. It's kind of one of those things where I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. You know what anti-aircraft means. Put these suckers in every big port or big airfield where you have a lot of assets. So if you think the Japanese are going to bomb that because it's a nice target, I'm talking Rangoon, Singapore, Palembang, Batavia, like all of these major places where you're going to have all of your ships and all of your planes, you want as much anti-aircraft as you can because you just get free shots at their planes, right? So you send up your fighters to try to fend them off, But now, with the AA, you're getting free shots. So that's AA, anti-aircraft. Now, what are we on? Oh, we're on the fifth type. The fifth is artillery and anti-tank. Artillery and anti-tank always have a dot in the middle of their card. That is the historic NATO symbol for artillery or anti-tank. It's going to have that. This is kind of a support unit, of course. It's going to be moving not really on its own. You see it's got a 0 assault strength. It's going to be moving with other infantry unit, or I say other, it's going to be moving with infantry units to kind of do a few specific things. And let's go back to Sydney. I like the card down here better. It shows you a little bit more. This is the Coastal Artillery Regiment. So again, this can kind of do it has a differentiation, a specificity to it. Um, so maybe we should go back to San Francisco. Sorry about that. I think this actually showed it better. Let's look at this. This is the 198th Field Artillery Battalion. Okay, we know it's a battalion. It's got two. This is the smallest unit in the game. Um, it'll show you it's got some howitzers, good gun. 155 millimeter too. So, it's got some nice guns. Now, what does this do? It's going to bombard the enemy, and we'll get into it over here in combat, but there is a attack mode that is just bombardment. You can only bombard with artillery pieces, okay? Now, some of your infantry units may have in their TOE, may have some artillery pieces, and those will fire, but these are dedicated units with artillery pieces. And then I think anti-tank kind of speaks for itself. Tank warfare, of course, is not as important in this game when you're dealing with jungles and islands. It's not as important as it is in other World War II games, but there still are tanks. They're out there, and I think if we go to Rangoon, we can go look at armor and kind of tie this into armor. Might be Pegu, might be Molmine, might not be any of those. Let's look at Calcutta. There we go. Calcutta has these tanks. As you can see, this is more of a motorized unit. Here's a nice picture of a tank. This will show you um, the symbol, of course, is the classic NATO symbol for tanks with this kind of oval, right? Now, an anti-tank unit is is going to look kind of like an artillery unit. You're going to want these around with infantry units that you have that may be kind of out in the open. So if we look out here outside of Calcutta, let's say the Japanese were marching here and we wanted to stop them. Now these are all clear hexes. These are actually good hexes, especially when you're talking about this area of the world where to have this many clear hexes in a row, this is a good place for tanks to operate. So you're going to want some anti-tank stuff. Um, we may have some anti-tank down here, or we may not. Here's another tank unit. Now, so the next thing we were going to talk about was armor. Armor, we've kind of covered it here. You do have tanks in theater. They're going to move better in clear spaces. They're going to move worse in jungles, in mountains, etc. Again, they have an assault strength. It will tell you that. So it's abstracting all of the different kinds of tanks it has, and it will come up with this value. The final thing in the seventh item, so we've got headquarters, infantry, engineer, anti-aircraft, and then we have artillery, anti-tank, which are kind of very similar. Uh, then we just saw armor, and now I'm going to go to the seventh one, which is coastal. So at a big place um, like this at Sydney, you're going to have these coastal guns. It's a coastal defense unit. As you see over here, if you look, you cannot strategically move it and you cannot move it. These things are in place. They're not going anywhere. You really kind of don't have to worry about them, right? You set them on combat mode, so if anything comes into the harbor, this big boy is going to take a shot at it. So that's the seventh type. And, with coastal, hey, it's great that you have them. Of course, the more firepower, the better, but there's not a whole lot to do with them. All right. So that's the seven different types, and we're going to go into headquarters. We're going to go back and go into headquarters here in just a moment. But I did want to point out, now we talked about this in the map section, that if you're ever curious about your ground units and and the kind of terrain they're in and how that affects them, always go up here to the upper right to the key. It will tell you the defense bonus that you're getting for that certain kind of terrain. They will tell you how much it costs to supply, with a 10 being a base, into that hex. It will tell you the different move rates for, we see here, artillery, AA, engineers, how they move, infantry, how they move, and armor, how they move. And then other, whatever the heck other is. I think this pretty much covers it. So just don't forget about this key being up here. If you're ever confused, like, we should always be trying to defend in heavy urban areas, right? It gives you a 4 times bonus. If we can't do that, we would prefer forest rough, jungle rough, mountains. Um, but you get that. If you played a war game before, but I just wanted to remind you that the keys were up here. So let's go back and talk about headquarters really fast. We just went through the 7 different classifications. I think for anyone that's played war games in the past, they're kind of self-explanatory. You get what they are, but for headquarters, I just wanted to point out a few things. And that is, you have these command headquarters that are kind of the grand overall headquarters of an area. So you'll see Australia Command, right? This is the head general, the big brass, the main guy for the Australians. This is his command headquarters and command unit. You'll see he has a command radius of 9, which is very good. Now, command headquarters provide a bonus on top of bonuses. And so stick with me here for a second, because we're actually going to go backwards through for size. So you have these core headquarters. They only have 3 stars down here. Their command radius is 1. And you can look here and see all of the ground units that it commands. It's got quite a few of them, uh, and we could go through this in a moment. But these are all of the units it commands. Now, its command radius is 1. For every unit, ground unit, that you have within 1 hex of this, in combat, it's going to get a 10% bonus. Okay, simple enough. Army headquarters, command radius 5, same deal. For every So units with the same headquarters, these are all the units that this Army headquarters commands. As long as they're within 5 hexes of this, it's going to get a 10% bonus. Great. The command headquarters then gives a bonus on top of those bonuses. So these have got to be present. So if we're looking way down here at a ground unit, this unit, and we can look up its chain of command. Um, it's part of the 30th Australian Brigade. If we click on that, 30th Australian Brigade, back, it is part of the Australia Command. So this is its command unit, Australia Command. Great. If we can go up and daisy chain up, it'll get a 10% bonus if it's next to its core headquarters. It'll get a 10% bonus if it's also in the 5 hex radius of its army headquarters. And then there will be additional bonuses on top of that if both of these things are true from the command headquarters. So that's how command works. Let's step back for a minute and just talk about war games in general. This command structure works like it does in so many other war games, which is it gives you bonuses and buffs if you are within the command radius of your headquarters. So, all other things being equal, try to be within that command radius. And I will show you this in China here in just a minute. But sometimes you can't be. Sometimes you have to move battalions or brigades or regiments here or there to protect things, and it may be, this is its core headquarters. This may be three away because you need to keep this with other units that need the buff more, let's say, need that bonus more. So, you don't have to be within that radius. And you'll see once we get out on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to keep some of these units with their command headquarters or their army headquarters or their core headquarters. It's just impossible to do it. And you just miss out on that. Headquarters do a lot of things. So Army and Corps headquarters add 10%. The command headquarters adds a bonus on top of that, but it also pulls in supply. So these command headquarters you're going to want at your big supply, where your big supply places will be. So you'll see with the US forces, of course, their main command out here in the Pacific is right here, Pacific Fleet Command Headquarters. Command units automatically pull supply to them up to, they want to get to 25,000 supply. So I'm just telling you, that's the programming of the game, that those units are going to want to pull supply until they have 25,000 in supply. Now, air command units, which we'll see here, we've got the Hawaiian USAF Air Headquarters, got a command radius of 5. For everything within its radius for air, it's going to allow you at those bases to have more air groups, to run more flights. Um, it also, oh, now remember, it also helps us, and in some cases makes it possible for upgrades or replacements. So you're going to generally want to have a big airfield where this sits, and then all the planes underneath it are very close, because then they can get upgrades and replacements. If you don't have this here or don't have this close, they can't get upgrades and replacements. Um, naval naval command units, they help with ship repair. They will speed that up. So if you have a naval headquarters unit, amphibious headquarters units. Let's go look at an amphibious headquarters unit, because that's kind of interesting, something we haven't talked about before. Yeah, this is it. The 1 U.S. Amphibious Corps. This cuts down on your losses when you are doing an amphibious landing. So that's pretty cool, right? You're going to want, when you get out here in the Pacific and you're trying to take Japanese islands, if you can, again, all other things being equal, if you can get these guys on those landing ships with all of the units that are underneath it, so there are a bunch of them, you will want one of those on your landing units because they cut down on the number of losses you take. Okay, so those are the basic kinds of or I shouldn't say command units. Those are the basic kinds of headquarters. You have command headquarters, which are the big boys, the big enchiladas, right? You have army and corps headquarters that are kind of underneath them. Army has a 5 radius. A core only has a 1 radius, so that kind of tells you, the importance. You have air, naval, and amphibious. Those are the main kinds of headquarters. Now, one further thing on headquarters. Headquarters are either restricted, temporarily restricted, static, or unrestricted. So what does that mean? That goes to what they are attached to. So this is attached to, the 1 Amphibious Corps is attached to the Pacific Fleet. It is not yet out into the Pacific. So we do not have to pay any political points to put this on a transport and move it out to the Pacific because it's attached to the Pacific, right? Let's go look at the Australian headquarters again. So we're here in Sydney. Here's your command headquarters. This thing is fixed. You're not, it's restricted, right? Um, Now it's not static. Static means you can't move it. And there are some headquarters that you cannot move. The Australian command can be moved. If we wanted to move it up here to Brisbane, because General Blarney liked the offices better up in Brisbane, we could move them up there. But they're restricted to staying in Australia. So that's what restricted means, and it's a very important concept, right? Now let's look at the Army here. First Australian Army, same thing. It's restricted to Australia Command. Let's look at the Corps. Now this is temporarily restricted. This core headquarters, right now, we can only move it in Australia. It and the units underneath it, we could only move them in Australia. Oh, and that was actually an important point I just made. This means that all of the units underneath this are also temporarily restricted to Australia. Now you can buy those units out down below by buying out the command that they have. So if they're no longer attached to, and let's just look at that as an example. Let's find, is there something here attached to this Eastern command? Well, I guess there's not. Shoot. Um, but if there was something that's in this core here, uh, let's look. Yeah. Oh, they're not on the board yet. That's why we couldn't find one. But if there was something that had this as its command unit, you can buy that out and put it into a different command for political points. Likewise, you can buy out this entire core by changing its headquarters. Does that make sense? So if out here we wanted it to be part of, let's say, the Southwest Pacific, uh, we wanted this core headquarters to be attached to that. If we pay the requisite political points, we can move that out of this command, move it to a different command, and everything underneath it, because it daisy chains up, right? The units go to this to the headquarters, and then the headquarters goes to whatever headquarters it's attached to. So that's how that works. So those are kind of the four different kinds. Again, if you see a hyperlink, you can buy it out, and then it's just a matter of what you're buying out. On the individual unit level, you're just buying out that unit. On the core headquarter level, you're buying out the whole core. On the army level, if that has a hyperlink, you're buying out the whole army. So just think of those things, because you are going to be doing quite a bit of that in this game, because you're going to need to get some, especially early in the game, you're really going to need to get some of those restricted headquarters out into theater. You're going to need that. Um, So let's see. I mean, with that, I did want to talk about. We looked at the key, and I kind of went over that very fast. One thing I did want to say about movement, and when we get in here as just like a big general talk about movement, is that it causes fatigue. Fatigue is one of the elements of combat. It's one of the modifiers that goes in there. And things can only move, I say things. Ground units can only move where they have a valid supply path. So let's go up to China, because China has got a lot of ground units going on. I know I've talked to people who just started this game and they look up at China and they're like, what's going on here? It all becomes clearer to you as you look at the map more and more. But basically, the yellow here are the Chinese units. You have some of them behind enemy lines to some extent. You see the Japanese have pushed out here, and you've got these guys that, they kind of have this corridor back here, because the Japanese have taken all of these coastal cities except for Hong Kong. And you've got, potential supply lines being cut. If the Japanese came down here or up here, right, and cut your supply, you can't move to a place where you don't have a valid supply path. Now, this isn't the greatest example. Maybe this is a better example. Um, this unit needs to have a valid supply path. If the Japanese came down here and let's say took this road and this guy's sitting here, he can't move this way. He doesn't have a valid supply path. So you always need your armies to have a valid supply path to move. And I just wanted to point that out. It also kind of goes to zone of control. Whatever direction this unit entered this hex from is where you have a zone of control and where you can retreat if you're defeated in battle. So if you're moving your forces, we move this guy up here to attack here. He only has a zone of control over this side of this hex. If he gets beaten, he's going to come back here. If he was here and he attacked in here, he would come back here. When it comes to zone of control, and this is all I'm going to say about it because I don't want to kind of go down that rabbit hole, it would take too long. When we're talking about zone of control, just don't let it really confuse you because ultimately it's sort of simple. When you have a ground unit in a hex, you control the hex. Okay? That hex also has 6 sides to it. It's hexagonal. It has 6 sides. You control all 6 sides of that hex. When you step out of that hex and you're no longer in it, you then only control the backside of this hex. You no longer control the sides or anything else of this hex. And then if you were going to retreat, you would just step back here because you control this hex side. You can only move through a hex side where you have a zone of control. Okay? And that's all I'm going to say about that. It becomes fairly intuitive where you have zones of control. Um, and in this game, because the hexes are 46 miles big, you don't have some of the same zone of control issues that you have in much smaller games where you're on a very small map and you maybe are talking about 100 feet. Well, zones of control are going to work a little different. Here you're moving divisions, battalions, whatever the case may be, through big swaths of area. But, if this guy moves in here, okay, he then has this hex side as he controls this hex side. You control the other 5 hex sides and the hex itself until this combat is resolved. The only one he controls is the backside one, and that's where he would retreat to. So I'm just going to leave that there. The other thing I'm going to talk about is combat in general. When I say the other thing, I'm going to talk about a lot more things. But the big picture stuff I wanted to talk about really fast is the effectiveness of your groups. So what do we have here? We have the 8th New Chinese Corps. It's an infantry unit. What makes this effective or not effective? Well, the first thing is what kind of weapons? So it's TOE. If you look over here, it's got 44 active rifle squads, 29 that are disabled. That's what's in parentheses is how many are disabled, how many are active. Okay? So when we're talking about what makes an effective or the effectiveness of a ground unit, it's what is it made up of? How powerful are those things? Who is its leader? And just like other leaders in this game, you can replace leaders if you wish. They have a leadership and an inspiration, administration, aggression, and how good they are on land. Okay, you can, you know, go look and you say, I don't like this guy at all. Is there somebody better on land that I can replace him with? Well, there is. I mean, Wei Zhu is out here. He's 60 on land. That's really good. If you want a more aggressive leader, you can find that. So let's go up to that really aggressive guy. Let's say that we really want our army to assault and be more aggressive. Um, let's pick Yu Xiao Mo. Okay, we just did. This tells you, it will tell you how many political points. It was 13. Sorry, it's right up here. 13 political points. And now, you see, we've got our, hold on, let's do this. I want to do it. Let's go back up, aggressiveness. 62. He's a promising exchange will cost 0. And are we not allowed to move him there? Or did he Po and U? Pick new leader for the unit. That's him. Let's pick this guy. Oh, I see. I keep clicking off of it the wrong way. I need to say done. Sorry about that. Okay. Sometimes the game has little quirks like that. It just took me a second to figure that out. Okay, so you have to hit done. You can't just hit exit. So this allows you, to not make a mistake. So let's go back to our aggressive guy. Uh, Mo you shall. Sheesh, stop doing that. Okay, so he's picked. He's green. If we just hit exit, it's kind of like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. If we hit done, now he's up here. Okay, that's actually a good thing to talk about when it just comes to the interface, completely by accident that I did that. Um, the other important, so you've got your leaders up here. I feel like this is not something we need to go into. Look, they've got different stats. If you want a different leader, I don't play the leader game that much. I may, if we're talking about a big task force, that's a very important task force, or we're talking about a big army, and you look over here and you're like, gosh, he's leading a whole army group. He's just got terrible stats. You may kick it up because it does have an effect. It definitely does. But I mean, you could spend years, and people have, figuring out who are the best leaders to lead every different group. That's just not my jam. It might be yours. Um, the other things that really matter for ground units as we go down the card here are experience and morale. Again, 50, these go on 0 to 100. 50 is kind of a basic guideline of something that's okay. It's medium, it's average, of course. It may be even a little worse than that. You would like to have 60 and above of everything. I can tell you in China, you don't really have that option. You take what you can get. The Chinese army is all about manpower. It's not about being the best or the equipment that they have or anything else. It's waves and waves of human beings. So experience, morale, I think they kind of speak for themselves. Fatigue, you don't really want this getting up over 10, because again, that will affect your combat values and how they perform in combat. Disruption, we see here 0. Disruption is very, very important. It's maybe, well, I don't want to say it's the most important. I mean, the most important is what the heck you've got. Or, fatigue could be most important if this is 99. But disruption is very important. When enemy air force bombs you, that's why you would bomb ground units, is to up their disruption level. Because when they're disrupted, they don't fight as well. And we're not going to go all the way into the algorithm of how much or how little that matters. It matters. And the less disruption you can have, the better. Supplies required, especially here in China, are super important. It's very hard to keep your armies or your brigades, battalions, regiments out here supplied. And if they're not supplied, of course, they're not going to be as effective. So that kind of goes into their assault strength and how effective they are as a force. Um, and the other things, of course, are terrain, what kind of mode that they're in, and we're going to go into orders here in a second. But I just kind of wanted to talk about the big top-down general things that affect your ground units and how effective they are. And you can find them all really right here, right here. And now again, you see up here uh, with this unit, this corps, it's got 24th Army, Group Army, First War area. I'll tell you in China, just really fast while we're here, First War area. This is like what's the best way to put it? It's bigger than an army. Okay, this is like a theater of operations. It's called area. So this is like your general. So think of in the US context, this would be like Eisenhower, the first war area. Now, China's so big and their army's so big, they've got, I believe, 9, 10, 11 of these that are kind of their regional commanders, and then you've got the armies underneath them. So while we've been talking about command, let's actually just go look at this for a second. Let's go down here to Cheng Chao. Cheng Chao is very important. You're going to want to try to hold Cheng Chao to the death. I can tell you in China, this railway here down to Wusheng, this railway and on up here is everything. It's everything. If you allow the Japanese to get control of this entire railway, they can send all of their supply straight down at here and start to just blast away at you. But as long as you kind of control this railway, you can disrupt their supply. At least you make it harder on them. As you can see, they can draw a supply path back to the coast, so they're going to get supply here, but they're not going to get nearly as much if they have a fully functioning major railway heading there. But anyway, I digress. Let's go down here to Chengchao. What do we have here? We have the First War Area Army Headquarters. Okay, so we've talked about Army Headquarters and what they are. They've got a command radius of 5. They give you a 10% bonus. And then what do we have underneath that? We have the 24th Group Army Corps Headquarters. Okay, this Corps Headquarters is attached to the First War Area. When you get into China, and I'll tell you, 39th Group Army, First War Area, great. I always keep these War Area Army Headquarters together with its Corps Headquarters, and then all of the infantry units that go underneath them. So you'll see here, 15th Chinese is attached to the 24th Group Army. We've got 24th Group Army. 24th Group Army is attached to the First War Area. First War Area. Okay, so we're seeing the entire chain of command here down to this core. Now we could even divide this core, right? Now we've divided this core and we see they're down into C, B, A core. Okay, so this is probably down to its component, maybe regiments, brigades, maybe even battalions down at this level, right? So you've divided this up, but they're with their command. They've got their direct core command and they've got their direct army command. This gives them plus 10%, plus 10%. You need all the help you can get in China. I keep all of these things together. I pick the major towns I want to hold. Chengchao is one of them. Now we're going to look around here. Now who is this? They're out here on their kind of their own. 8th New Chinese Corps. Okay, it's an infantry unit. Its command is the 24th Group Army. Now we know the 24th Group Army is back here at Chengchao. Here it is. It's got a command radius of 1, so it is giving the bonus to this ground unit here. It's within 1, it gets that 10% bonus. The Army headquarters, which is its direct Army headquarters because this Army has the 24th underneath it, and this is a part of the 24th, is also giving it 10%. So you start to see how those bonuses work, and they're very important, especially in places like China. You just need all the help you can get, and in a war game in general, isn't that a big part of it? Trying to get all the bonuses and buffs to make your units as effective as they can be. Now, for some of the final stuff that we're going to talk about here, let's go look at the card again. We've talked about, what is this? It's got its name, its identifier. 34 of 57 just tells you how many units are disabled, okay? Um, on a percentage basis, that 34 and 57 is what it's attached to, who its commander is. We've talked about all this. You've got experience, morale, disruption, fatigue, the 4 stats about your group here. Supplies and supplies required, support required, and then your ultimate assault strength. Now, you may say, what about support? How do we get more support? Usually with ground units, it works kind of two ways. One is you have embedded support in almost every ground unit. Okay? So I do not want to pick a new leader. Get off that. That was distracting me. So you have embedded support that you'll see in each unit, and that's all we've got here, right? You also have support that you can share, and that's from generally leadership units. So uh, this Army headquarters has 111 support. As long as you are at a friendly base, okay, we're at a friendly base. As long as you are at a friendly base of, groupings of your troops, they can farm out this support. Headquarters units farms out their support. You see here, it provides 111 support. It has 0 support required. That's just internal to it. It takes kind of care of itself. So when we go down here, you see that this has got 28 support, this 15th Chinese Corps. It's got 28 support naturally. It tells you it's got 28 support. And then it says we need 40 support, but it's in green. Why is that in green? It's getting support from your headquarters units. And that's another reason that headquarters units are very, very important. They make sure that supply, which is the lifeblood of ground units, we've talked about this before, supply for ground and air units, fuel for naval units. So supply, of course, very important for ground units. Um, supply kind of wraps up into it, ammunition, things like that. Um, that's why it's very important to keep your units very close to your headquarters units. Now, again, remember, they have to be at a friendly base to get that support sharing. But very important, it'll be in green. If you don't have enough support, it'll be in red. You may want to go and look at it and think, how could I get this unit to where its headquarters unit is so that that headquarters unit provides it some supply? Now, I will tell you, take this group here. This will kind of, uh, show our point. This unit naturally has 45 support. That's great. That's all we need. But this unit, since it's not at the friendly base, it's out here in the countryside, would not get the shared support of the headquarters. Okay? The next thing down is troop load cost, cargo load cost, total load cost. Now, we went over this with the naval. I think this is an absolutely ingenious system of loading troops onto things. Um, I still think it's the best system. I don't know that I've ever seen it in another game since. I don't know why everybody wouldn't copy this because, as we talked about in the naval unit about transports, this tells you exactly what you need ship-wise, and then you can go test it. And for this, let's just go back to San Francisco, because we know this one's easy, right? We did this before. Pacific Fleet, this one's all cargo. Let's see if, yeah, here we go. Shoot, that's West Coast. This is Pacific Fleet. Perfect. 56th Coastal Artillery Regiment. So this is a big coastal gun, but you are able to move it. So we're going to put it out on an island. Imagine sailing your Japanese task force up here and having this bad boy fire off. Um, you need 170 troop load cost, 5121 cargo, and it's 5291 altogether. So as we talked about before, let's just go find, take off all ships. Let's go find our APs. For these purposes, I'm just gonna make a huge transport task force for the heck of it. All ships, APs. Let's just take all of these APs for fun. Why not? Done. This is our task force. Uh, they've got a ton of capacity. Let's hit load troops. And you see, so here's, what was the name of our unit? Let's go back really fast. I'm sorry. It's the 216th Coastal. Let's go back to our task force, load troops, 216th Coastal. Where is this sucker? Oh, it's these guys. Okay. I was like, how did I miss that? Um, but it's not in strategic mode. We've talked about that before. So we would go back here and we will talk about this again. Boy, I just messed that all up. There it is, the 56th Coastal. Sorry. Um, you put this in strategic move, done there. Let's go back. Let's go to the transport. Now let's try to load those troops of the 56 construction. All we have to do is select the unit. It will tell us, I put together a ton of ships there, right? 15,700 cargo load available. Troop load available is 8550. We're only using 170 for the troops, and we're only using 5121 for the cargo, so we're very good there. We'll go to verify load. It tells us percent allocated, 100%. Let's do use minimum ships. We didn't show this in the naval section. It will take some ships out um, and remove them from the task force because we don't need them. So if you kind of want to hurry sometimes with task or transport task forces, you can just put a bunch of ships in, come down here, go to use minimum ships. So there, and it'll tell you what ships you actually need to load this unit. So then we just accept load, and now you see they put the first, this first point of these guys on this ship so that they've got a hook on this ship. When I say that's not a technical term in the game. That's a term I use. They've, hooked themselves into the ship so that you can see they're being loaded. Okay, now with that, let's talk about orders. Now I've used, actually for that, let's go out to China. I've saved orders for last because I really don't think they're that complicated. Let's look at these guys here. Who is this? We've got the 7th Group Army Corps Headquarters. Okay. We've got the 33rd Chinese. They're with the 7th Group Army. Okay. 7th Group Army. So this is its direct command headquarters. Then we're going to look around for the Second War Army area, or the Second War area, and it's going to have 4 stars wherever it is, and we're going to try to make it there. What is this? Second War area. There we go. It's up in Yan'an. Yan'an to the north. Very important town. We're going to try to control Yan'an. It also has some interesting things when you talk about the fact the Red Chinese Army, you'll see Red Chinese Army. Red Chinese Army is down here. Um, Mao Zedong is their general, and they like to stick together, the Red Chinese Army. Uh, again, I'm digressing. Let's go back up here. So we found it's this group, right? Yep, this is the group. We found the 7th Group Army. Their direct superior is the Second War area. This unit traces up to um, the 7th Group Army. 7th Group Army traces up to the Second War area. Okay, so we're going to try to give these guys orders. Now, what orders can you give this? Okay, forget about this for a second because we've got to decide the actual order before we can think about a destination. So the first operations, they call it operations mode. I think of it as orders. The first one is combat. Well, that's kind of self-explanatory. If you're if you have an enemy unit in your hex or in the next hex and you think they may move into your hex, you want this set to combat. The one of the factors of the effectiveness of your force was the operations mode. We kind of glossed over it a minute ago, but the operations mode that this thing is in will affect its effectiveness, right? The most effective a unit can be is if it's in combat mode. So why wouldn't you always have something in combat mode, right? Because it moves the slowest. So if it's in combat mode, it's just a rule of thumb I think of. It moves about half as fast as it does if it's in move mode. Okay, so move is like march. I just think of it that way. If it's moving, it's marching. But if they're marching, they're more prone than if they're slightly dug in. Maybe they have a rear guard force. Maybe they're being a lot more careful. I don't know. Think of Vietnam when you see those guys kind of, crawling through the jungle, moving very slowly. That's what I think of as combat. Now, combat, you can still set a destination hex. I think maybe that confuses people sometimes. They think of combat and they think it has to be static. It does not. They can be moving just in combat mode. So what is let's go back. As soon as we hit set destination hex, then it brings up the kind of clear blank screen with nothing on it, and you just click on the base where you want it to go. And it says unit will march to Yan'an. And once you do that, you see this other information. Its march objective is 8837 Yan'an. Its march direction is northeast originally, and this will always plot where it wants to go. Now, I will say this, the ground units don't really have waypoints. It's always going to go the most efficient way, I find anyway. So, let's look at these guys again. Oh, I'm sorry, they're right here. Now, you'll see, it kind of makes me laugh. You'll see this little digit or indentation or something up on top of that box. I know it's hard to see, but when you have a million of these out here, if you quickly look, this means it's moving. You've given it an order to go somewhere. If you see that little bitty tick on top of there, and if you've got a big screen, you're running at full screen, maybe it's easier to see than it is right here, but that little tick to the upper part of the box, and it will show you the direction it's moving. So it told us northeast, so it's at the northeast part of the box. Let's go down here, pull this one up, and let's just set its destination to here. Okay, it will march to there. Its march objective, its march direction, southwest. Let's go back here. You can see the little tick down here to the bottom left of the box. So it'll show you which direction this thing is moving. Now this is moving northeast. It's going to come here first. If it was coming here, of course, it would tell us east, but it's going to try to avoid this Japanese unit, whatever this is here. You do have uh, detection levels here. You see that the enemy units 4, spotted troops 3580, guns 27. So you do have some recon on this. And always look at this. Again, the Japanese units work the same way. This darker red likely means they have more combat value, or I should call it assault value, I guess, since that's what the game calls it. Um, it actually calls it assault strength, but you get the idea. Um, so yes, we've given this a movement order, and we've told it to move to Yan'an. Now, one quick little shortcut, I guess you would say, is that when you have just a leadership unit here and infantry, that you want all of it to move with that leadership unit, all you have to do is hit set all to this op mode. So this is the op mode. So now they're all going to be combat. Set all to this combat orders. Okay, combat orders. In combat, where we are right here, the only option we have is to defend because we're not close enough to attack anything. There's nothing in our hex, so we can't attack. So set all the combat orders. We don't have to worry about this, but you could set it here. Set all to follow. Now this is very important. So now every other unit here is going to follow this leadership unit that you have clicked on wherever it's going. Okay? And how do we know? Yep, now we can come over here. Now it's set the 33rd Chinese Corps to move to this objective, move that direction, gives you the same distance and how far it's gone. It's following the 7th Group Army. You could say set all to march. Okay, that would just change our movement order to move. And there we go. Move, like I said, as a rule of thumb for me, I don't know if this is actually true. I think of move as being about twice as fast. Um, so let's hit set all to march. They're all going to march um, to Yan'an. We would have to also do set all to this op mode. We go down here, and now this is on move. Okay. Um, Reserve. We're not going to get deep into reserve. So I think move kind of speaks for itself, right? If you want to move somewhere, you give it the operations mode of move, and you click wherever you want it to move. It's really kind of that simple. Reserve, you can hold units back. So let's say we had a bunch of units here, and this one was fatigued or tired, and you thought, well, I don't think it's going to be very effective. But if the battle starts to go poorly for us, then we needed to get involved. You can put it on reserve. Now, this says pursuit. It generally just means that if you win or are starting to win the battle, this will go into move mode and chase down the opposition, chase down the enemy. So reserve has two functions, one offensive, one defensive. If it's defensive and you start to lose the battle, then your general, depending on how good he, well, I should say commander, it might not be a general, your commander will then put those troops into the battle for the defense. If you're on the attack and or even if you're just defending and the battle starts to go your way and the other side retreats based on what your commander wants to do, they can pursue. So that's all that is. All right. Now let's talk about strategic move because strategic move is probably what you're going to be doing the majority of the time. So let's go down here to Cheng Chao again. Uh, again, if we wanted to move things, so let's say we wanted this guy to come up to us, we would probably put it in move. He's not in any kind of danger here. The only other time you want to think about that is if he might get bombed. So he will suffer more casualties if he's in move mode than he will if he's in combat mode. So just something to think about. So again, very easy. We would just click right here. We want them to move to Cheng Chao. We move back here. You see the little divot now, so we know it's confirmed he's moving. It will tell us they're marching to Cheng Chao, march direction northeast, etc. But now let's say you want to move somebody from Cheng Chao and you say, let's move that person up here to Cyan. Okay? How do you do that? Well, you click on the card here and you go to strategic move. Now remember, as the Japanese player, strategic move means you can only move on railways or on ships. As the Allied player, you have an advantage that strategic move means you can move on railways, ships, and major roads. So if you have a major road out here, like this one, you could strategic move on this. And it essentially kind of models jumping into a bunch of trucks and they drive you there. The railway, it's modeling, you're jumping, getting all your troops onto the railroad and moving it. So it's a faster form of movement. It's also the most dangerous kind of movement because your troops are completely prone to air bombardment, to if you run into an enemy in a hex, your people aren't ready. You probably have all your equipment packed up, whatnot. You want to be doing this behind your lines a pretty good distance. But let's look at strategic move. You hit it, pack, unpack 3 days. Now we talked about this in relation to putting these on transports or putting your ground units on transports. This is just modeling, hey, it takes a few days to put all of your stuff to get all your guys ready to go, put all their stuff on a train, on trucks, on a ship, whatever the case may be. So you sometimes have to weigh this and say, well, gosh, I want these guys to get out of here now. You know, is it going to be faster to march them, or is it going to be faster to have them pack for 3 days and then unpack on the other end for 3 days and put them on a railway? Well, I guess it all depends on how far you're going, but this works just the same as move or combat. You hit strategic move and you set your destination. Now, if it cannot go there for some reason, so let's click on cyan. I said cyan for a reason, which is it's unable to reach it. Why is it unable to reach it? There is not a major road or a railway connecting these two places, right? This railroad stops here in the mountains. This is a minor road, so you can't get there this way. It does have a major road that you almost get to, but this is not connected, you see. It looks like it should be connected. Um, so what you could do with these guys, of course, is move them and move them, over here, and then strategic move them, or just move them right here, and then strategic move them on the roads. If you've got them here for some reason and you want to stick them on a railroad for the last bit of that journey, you can do that. Uh, but essentially, when you hit strategic move, it just works when you set the destination hex. We can set it right here. Oh, it has to go to a friendly base. Sorry. Um, so let's go back to, let's say, wow, China's maybe not the best example because okay, let's try these guys. Let's say we want this 12th Group Army Corps headquarters to move north. We'll just select this base. It says unit will move to Hengyang. It's going to be doing it by rail. Pack unpack, it's doing, and you'll see this strategic move. Once it's confirmed it's going to be doing it by rail, it'll say RR. If it was going to do it by major road, it will give you a different one. So let's see if we can move these guys. Strategic, oh, they don't allow you to strategic move up here. That might actually be a China thing. You don't have a chance to do a lot of strategic moving in China because you're already in such a bad shape. Um, so let's look at the final thing, which is rest training. I mean, I think this kind of speaks for itself. If your fatigue has gotten very high and you feel like it's really hurting your fighting force and you can afford to do it, you're not in a hot zone, you don't need these guys, or maybe you need them, but it's not absolutely pressing, you can put them to rest training. Again, if they're in that mode, they're not ready to fight really, so you want to be doing that quite a ways behind enemy lines, or enemy lines, behind your own lines. Let's call those friendly lines. We just talked about setting all. Again, these are convenience buttons. You can cancel move for all units. Up here, you saw when we set destination hex, you can also cancel just that order right there. Set future objective. Now, this is very, very important. You want, well, you're going to be forced to do this for every unit you have. This is on a scale from 0 to 100. When you set it, you start to gain 1 to 2 points every day that objective is set. Now, you're not necessarily really restricted what you can set your order to. So let's look at these guys. This is the 35th Group Army. And let's say set future objective. So they're in Nanning right now. Right here. They're in Nanning. Let's say that we know we're eventually going to move them up to Kwayang. So we're going to march them up here, or we know we're going to get pushed back by the Japanese, and that we're eventually going to retreat to Kwayang. We could set that as its objective. And I love this about this game. I think it was one of the really innovative things they did about this game is they did this set future objective because it really does model that planning, or if you know a local place better than the enemy. Sometimes I think war games don't take that into account, that when you're attacking an enemy and you know the terrain, you know the city, you know the area, you're going to have an advantage. And most games don't really model that. They model the terrain, you get defense bonuses or not, but they don't talk about familiarity. And that's what this really does is you're going to try to pick for each unit where's its main area to hang out? Where is it going to get its intel? and information from so that it knows the area. Maybe it kind of also models, having little pillboxes out there. The more that you know about a place, the more of advantage that you'll have, and this will start to build to 100. I will tell you, as an allied player, you don't really want to assault something until you're way closer to 100 than you are to 0. I mean, ideally it would be 100, and you'll be doing that for these little islands out in the Pacific. So when you're going to be, you know, sending an amphibious force, let's say when we lose Wake and we're going to try to take Wake back, you're going to want almost all of your ground units with Wake Island as their future objective. It makes a big difference when you're assaulting something. So it's definitely something to always keep in mind. So let's go back down here to Sydney and let's just see if we've forgotten anything. We've talked we've talked about headquarters, we've talked about error headquarters, we've talked about all this stuff. I would just say I always go down here and look at the unit organization. So the 30th Australian Brigade, if you're looking for the command for these guys or other similar units to try to get the bonuses, just click on this and it will tell you this battalion. Okay, let's go back for a second. This is the 39th Australian Battalion. You'll see up here, 39th Australian Battalion, the 49th Australian Battalion, the 53rd Australian Battalion. These three units together make up the 30th Australian Brigade. They are not active yet, or the 30th Australian Brigade is not active yet. If you get these three in the same hex, you will not be able to rebuild them yet. You'll see this is gray. But once this becomes active, this headquarters unit becomes active and it comes on the map, if you can get all three of these battalions into the same hex, you can combine them into the 30th Australian Brigade. So, all other things being equal, you want to try to get these things to the same location, right? Um, and when they are, it will tell you because it will no longer be grayed out that you can then rebuild the unit and it will form the 30th Australian Brigade. You can also disband this unit. That's such a specialized thing. It's just not really, it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. You can show the unit uh, TOE, so the table of elements. Let's pull that up. This will show you, I'm glad we actually came back to this. This will show you the ideal setup for this battalion. So this is ideally how many of the infantry sections we would have, 36, which would be 360 men. For the Vickers 6, for the support 34. So if you click, now it's showing in red because we're not on the default. When you click it again, it'll show you what you actually have. And good, these guys are all at full strength. None of them are disabled. So that's good. You can see units with the same headquarters. You can see, oh, replacements on, upgrades allowed. I guess when I booted up the game this time, I had these both set to automatic yes. When we do our Let's Play, we're not going to do that. We're going to individually set replacements and upgrades. So I think we've covered most of the, I never want to say all because I'm sure there was something that I didn't cover, but I really tried to cover everything that I think you'll need as a beginning player anyway. Again, like every other part of this game, there are rabbit holes you can go down for each and every specific thing we talked about today and learn a lot more about it, whether it be on the forums or just playing the game and kind of clicking around and figuring it out yourself. The most important things with this are assault strength. You can play the game focusing on a couple of things, assault strength and having your units within the radius of their commands to get the bonuses. It can be that simple. Uh, you are in this game going to be moving these units around by the ocean quite often. Um, And so these load costs are very important. I think by now should kind of see how that works. I mean, we've done it a couple of times, but I do realize that can be confusing early on. Let me tell you, when you've played 50 hours of the game or so, you're going to be clicking on those things so fast that if anybody sees you, they'll, what in the world's going on? Because you can set those up very quickly. Again, you always want to keep everything in supply. I don't think that that's a mystery to anyone. Disruption, fatigue, experience, morale, these are the major stats about your units. We talked about the table of elements. We talked about commanders. We talked about command. And, is this temporary? Yes, this is temporary. You could buy this out and move this off of Australia if you wanted to. I think movement is pretty simple once you see it one time. You click on what kind of order or operations mode you want to be in, and then you just click where you want it to go. Yeah, there you go. Uh, just always remember that combat does not have to be static. Now, if you do have someone in combat mode, it can be static, unless you give it a destination hex. If there's no destination hex, it's static. That does remind me, when you have engineers along with you, they will automatically start trying to entrench if you're not moving, and build up your fortification level. So there's that. Oh, I think one thing I should say about combat is let's go somewhere. Um, so there's always one more thing, but I do think this is really important, and I'm glad I didn't completely forget it. Oh, we're up in the Soviet Union. Sorry. Let's look at these guys right here, and let's say that, oh gosh, they're not able to attack. Do we have somebody close enough to attack? Yes. Okay, perfect. So when you're attacking, this is a very important point. When you're attacking someone or you want to take a hex from someone, now if you don't want to attack them, you would just be combat defend. Done. You know, if you think they're going to attack you or you're close enough to them or you're worried about it, always be in combat defend. But if you want to attack them, you have three different attack modes. You can do bombardment, okay? So we will be setting, it's combat. We would set the destination hex to here. So they're going to be moving there. You're going to have combat. Now, what is bombardment? Bombardment is you're sitting back and letting your artillery bombard away at them. It's a distance type attack, right? It's like lobbing shells over the line. You're not going to have your infantry units in there, but anything that's got artillery will do a bombardment. So you may use that to soften up an enemy. The second kind of attack is deliberate. And deliberate would be your kind of default attack. Hey, we're going to go probe the lines if things look good, depending on your commander, how aggressive he is, for instance. We will attack, or at least that's our orders, but we may not. If we don't like the numbers, we don't like something else about the modifiers, your leader can pull back or your commander can pull them back. So that's just your vanilla kind of attack. And then you have shock attack. So shock attack is like an assault. Think of it as an assault. When you're going to be trying to take a base, when you're going to be trying to take an island, as a matter of fact, I think that's default when you attack an atoll. You're going to be on shock attack because that's assault. And with that, I'm going to try to keep this under an hour 30. We're very close right now. So I want to say all of my thank yous. Thank you very much for listening. If you made it to this episode 11, I'm really happy. I think you'll love this game. I hope I've given you the basic building blocks of how to play the game. If you've really enjoyed it and you want to continue on, I will be doing that Let's Play, and I'm going to start that immediately, literally tonight. Put that up and get the first. Uh, well, we won't be doing the whole first turn. We will be doing the Allied setup starting in Alaska, and we'll be going to every different region and kind of trying to figure out why we're doing what we're doing, why we're setting up things the way we're setting them up, and kind of talk through it. Then I'm going to go offline, set them up, come back and talk about why we did it. So, again, thank you so much for listening. If you really enjoyed this and you haven't done so already, please click subscribe. I always appreciate it. And for Strategy Gaming Dojo, this has been a War in the Pacific tutorial, and I think we're at the end of it. So, thank you as always, and goodbye. I'll talk to you next time.